There's a portrait in our family museum of a boy who never made it to 22. His name was Matteo, the first Matteo. On the night of his 21st birthday in 1834, he screamed once, and then he was gone, vanished, erased from existence as payment for a debt his father had made in desperation. 27 others followed. 27 firstborns, swallowed by a darkness that hungers with mathematical precision. I named my son Matteo, not as a curse but as a promise. He will be the last. The Velasquez estate had always felt like a mausoleum dressed in finery. Perhaps it was the way the afternoon light struggled through the heavy velvet curtains, or how the marble floors echoed with footsteps that seemed to belong to ghosts rather than the living. Isabella Velasquez had grown up believing that all wealthy families in Guadalajara lived this way, in houses too grand for comfort, with rooms that remained locked for reasons no one would explain, and with a particular kind of sorrow that seeped through the walls like dampness after rain. She was 24 when she discovered she was pregnant. The news should have filled her with joy, but when she told her mother, Sophia, something flickered in those dark eyes that made Isabella's blood run cold. It wasn't disapproval or surprise. It was recognition, a terrible ancient recognition, as if Sophia were looking not at her daughter, but at a reflection of every woman in their bloodline who had stood in this exact spot, bearing this exact news. "Is it your first?" Sophia asked, though she already knew the answer. Her hands trembled as she set down the porcelain cup painted with hummingbirds. And Isabella noticed how her mother's fingers had become thin as winter branches. "The ring's loose on them now. Yes, Mamma, Raphael and I are so happy," Isabella began. But the words died in her throat when she saw a single tear trace the landscape of her mother's weathered face. "I need to tell you something," Sophia said, her voice fracturing like old plaster. "Something I should have told you long ago. Something about our family. About the money. About why we've never wanted for anything except for one thing. The one thing that matters most." And so, on that humid September afternoon, while the jacaranda trees outside swayed in a wind that carried the scent of rain and regret, Isabella learned the truth that her family had carried for 200 years like a stone in their throats. It had begun with Rodrigo Velasquez in 1823, in the chaos following Mexico's independence. He was an ordinary man, a merchant struggling to feed his wife and 4 children in a small house on the outskirts of what would one day become a great city. The drought that year was merciless, and when his youngest daughter, little Luz, fell ill with fever, the doctors demanded payment he couldn't provide. The medicine that might save her cost more than Rodrigo would earn in 5 years. Desperate, he wandered the twisted streets of the old quarter, searching for any opportunity, any hope. That's when he found the shop. It occupied a corner he was certain had been empty the day before, tucked into an alley where the shadows seemed to move with purpose. The door was black as obsidian, and above it hung a sign with symbols that Rodrigo couldn't read but somehow understood. Inside, an ancient man, or perhaps it wasn't a man at all, sat behind a counter covered in objects that seemed to shift when Isabella looked at them directly. His eyes were the color of old amber, and when he smiled at Rodrigo, there were too many teeth in his mouth, each one sharp as broken glass. "You need wealth," the creature said. "Not as a question, but as a statement of fact. Wealth to save your daughter. Wealth to ensure your family never suffers again. Wealth that will flow through your bloodline for generations, making each descendant richer than the last." Rodrigo, shaking with cold and desperation, could only nod. "I can give you this," the creature continued, his voice like honey poured over razors. "But everything has a price. The prosperity you desire will come, and it will be more abundant than you can imagine. Your business will flourish. Opportunities will find you. Your family will rise to heights you never dreamed possible. What do you want in return?" Rodrigo asked, though part of him already knew he shouldn't. The smile widened impossibly. "A simple thing. In every generation of your family, the firstborn child must return to me. On the midnight of their 21st birthday, their life becomes mine. Rodrigo stepped back, horror crawling up his spine. But then he thought of Luz, coughing blood into rags in their cold room. He thought of his wife, Maria, whose face had grown gaunt from giving her portions to the children. He thought of his other children, watching them grow tall and strong. "Luz is not my firstborn," he said slowly. "My eldest is Mateo. Then it will be Mateo," the creature agreed. "And the firstborn of each generation after. A small price for eternal prosperity, don't you think?" Rodrigo knew he was making a pact with something unholy. But Mateo was only 9 years old, and 21 seemed like forever. Perhaps there would be time to find a way to break the agreement. Perhaps he could find a solution. "I accept," he whispered. The creature produced a parchment and a quill. But when Rodrigo reached to sign, he saw the quill had no ink. The creature took a small blade, and before Rodrigo could protest, sliced open his palm. Blood welled up dark and thick, and with it, Rodrigo signed his name. "It is done," the creature said. "Beginning tomorrow, your fortune will change. But remember, the contract cannot be broken. If you attempt to deceive the bargain, or if the firstborn is not delivered at the appointed time, your entire lineage will suffer a fate worse than death. All wealth will turn to ash, all happiness to torment, and you will walk the earth as tormented spirits, unable to find peace in life or in death." Rodrigo stumbled from the shop. When he looked back, the alley was empty. The shop had vanished as if it had never existed, but the next day, everything changed. A distant uncle died unexpectedly, leaving Rodrigo a considerable fortune. An investment he'd made years ago, which he'd thought lost, suddenly multiplied 1,000-fold. Business opportunities fell into his lap like ripe fruit from a tree. Within 6 months, Rodrigo Velázquez was one of the wealthiest men in Guadalajara. Luz recovered completely. Maria smiled again. The children had everything they desired, and Rodrigo convinced himself that he would find a way to save Mateo before he turned 21. But he didn't. On the night of Mateo's 21st birthday, Rodrigo locked his son in a room in the cellar of their new hacienda. He hired guards. He placed bars on the windows and multiple locks on the door. He did everything in his power to keep the boy, now a man, safe. Mateo begged to understand what was happening. Why was his father doing this? What terrible danger justified such imprisonment? Rodrigo couldn't meet his son's eyes. Couldn't tell the truth about the bargain he'd made 12 years ago, when desperation had clouded his judgment and love for one child had sealed the fate of another. At midnight, the guards heard Mateo scream. When they broke down the door, the room was empty. There were no signs of struggle, no broken windows, no explanation. Mateo had simply vanished, as if he'd never existed at all. But in the morning, when Rodrigo woke, crushed by guilt and horror at what had happened, he found an envelope on his desk. Inside was a note written in the same hand that had been on the contract. "The debt is paid. Your prosperity continues." And it did. Against everything that was just or moral, the Velázquez family became even wealthier. Rodrigo lived to be 81 years old, tormented by nightmares every night, seeing Mateo's face in every shadow. Before he died, he gathered his surviving children, Luz and Carlos, and told them the truth. He showed them the contract, now yellowed with time, but still legible. He begged them never to have children, to let the bloodline end with them. But Luz already had 3 children, and her firstborn, a girl named Valentina, was about to turn 18. "We cannot undo what was done," Luz said to her dying father. "But we can use this wealth to do good. We can ensure the sacrifices are not in vain." Rodrigo died that night, murmuring Mateo's name, and 3 years later, on the midnight of Valentina's 21st birthday, she too disappeared. Sofia told Isabella how, generation after generation, the Velázquez family tried to break the curse. They consulted priests, mystics, shamans. They attempted never to have children, but somehow always did. They tried to hide the firstborn, send them far away, give them new identities. Nothing worked. When midnight struck on the 21st birthday, no matter where the firstborn was, they simply vanished. Sometimes there were witnesses who spoke of a darkness that formed from nothing, swallowing the person whole. Other times, they simply blinked and the person was gone. And with each disappearance, the family fortune grew exponentially. It was as if the universe itself was mocking them, rewarding them for their loss with more money than they could ever spend. "Your grandfather was the firstborn," Sophia said, tears flowing freely now. "Eduardo Velázquez. He was brilliant, kind, full of life. And then, on his 21st birthday, I was beside him. I held his hand. I promised nothing would happen to him." She paused, sobbing. But at exactly midnight, he looked at me with such fear in his eyes. He said, "Te amo, Mama," and then darkness began to wrap around him like smoke. I tried to hold on. I screamed. I prayed. But he was pulled from me as if invisible hands were dragging him away. And I was left alone in that room, clutching empty air where my son had been seconds before. Isabella was pale, her hand instinctively moving to her belly where new life was growing. "Why did you have children knowing this? Why did any of you?" "Because we're cursed," Sophia answered simply. "We tried not to. Your great-grandmother had a hysterectomy at 24, but somehow, years later, she became pregnant anyway. The doctors called it a miracle. She knew it was the curse insuring itself. The contract always finds a way." "And you?" Isabella asked. "Why did you have me if you knew what I would face?" Sophia closed her eyes. "Because I loved you before you were even born. Because I hoped, prayed that somehow you might be the exception. And because," she hesitated, "because part of me was tired of fighting. The curse always wins, Isabella, always." "No," Isabella said, her voice trembling but determined. "There will be a way. There has to be. 200 years, Mija. 200 years of firstborns lost. Do you think we haven't tried everything? Your great-grandfather spent millions searching for answers. He found the descendant of one of the apprentices of the creature that made the contract with Rodrigo. Do you know what that descendant said?" Isabella shook her head. "He said the contract was with something far older than humans, something that existed when the world was still forming, and that the only way to break it would be to pay the full price all at once. The entire bloodline would have to be sacrificed. Every living Velázquez would have to die at the same moment, voluntarily. Only then would the contract be voided." "Then that's what we'll do," Isabella said immediately, "and kill your unborn child." Sophia shot back. "Kill yourself, me, all your cousins, aunts, uncles. There are 42 living Velázquez family members now, Isabella, including children. Could you do that?" Isabella buried her face in her hands. "There must be another way." "We always think so," Sophia said softly. "And we're always wrong." Isabella refused to accept defeat. In the months that followed, as her belly swelled with the life of her child, she became obsessed. She transformed one of the rooms in the hacienda into an investigation office, covering the walls with family genealogies, copies of ancient documents, and notes about every attempt to break the curse. Rafael, her husband, tried to be supportive, but his concern grew. "Bella, this can't be healthy. For you or for the baby?" "Healthy?" She laughed bitterly. "Rafael, our child will die on their 21st birthday. Unless it's a girl and we have another child first. Then that other child will die. How can I think about anything else?" Rafael, who had grown up in a normal, loving family, couldn't fully comprehend the horror he'd married into. He suggested practical solutions. Don't register the birth, raise the child in secret, change identities. Isabella had to explain repeatedly that the curse didn't care about paperwork. It knew, in some deep and instinctive way, who the firstborn was. There was no deceiving it, but Isabella discovered something interesting in her research. In 1889, a Velázquez firstborn named Gabriela had survived until her 22nd birthday. Isabella found letters from her written after the fateful date, filled with relief and confusion. Gabriela had been spared, but then Isabella found the obituary. Gabriela had died 3 days after her 22nd birthday in mysterious circumstances. And her youngest child, a boy only 4 years old, had disappeared the same night. The curse had collected its debt, just with interest. Isabella also discovered something more disturbing. She found Rodrigo's diary hidden behind a false wall in the library. The final entries were nearly illegible, written with a shaking hand, but the message was clear. Rodrigo had tried to kill himself before Mateo's fate was sealed. He'd taken enough poison to kill 3 men, but he didn't die. He vomited everything, his vision blurred, his heart briefly stopped, but he survived. And on the wall beside his bed, something had written in what looked like burned blood, "You do not escape so easily." The Velasquez family couldn't break the contract by dying. They couldn't run. They couldn't hide. They couldn't fight, but Isabella refused to give up. Isabella gave birth on a stormy night in May. It was a difficult labor, and for one terrible moment, the doctors thought they might lose both mother and baby. But then a cry echoed through the delivery room. A boy, healthy, with strong lungs and curious eyes. They named him Mateo after the first. Raphael thought the name morbid, but Isabella insisted. "He won't be forgotten like the others," she said. "He will have a story. He will be remembered." The first months were the best and worst of Isabella's life. Every smile from little Mateo, every developmental milestone, every precious moment was tinged with the awareness of a clock that never stopped ticking. 21 years. It seemed like an eternity, and at the same time, nowhere near enough. Sophia visited frequently, and Isabella saw the pain in her mother's eyes every time she held her grandson. It was the same pain Sophia had felt holding Eduardo, knowing each embrace brought them closer to the inevitable goodbye. "He has your eyes," Sophia said one afternoon, cradling Mateo as he slept. Eduardo had them too. All the Velasquez firstborns have them. Those grey-green eyes, like the sea before a storm. "Stop," Isabella pleaded. "Don't speak of him in the past tense. He's here. He's alive for now," Sophia said softly. "Mija, I know you're searching for answers, but I searched too. My mother searched. We all searched. The only answer is to treasure the time we have." "It's not enough," Isabella insisted. 21 years isn't enough, but as months turned into years, Isabella began to understand what her mother meant. Mateo was a brilliant, joyful child. He loved books, asked impossible questions, laughed at everything and nothing. How could she not treasure every moment? And yet, the research continued. Mateo was 7 when Isabella finally found something new. She was in the National Archives, combing through obscure records of 19th century occultism, when an elderly man sat across from her. "You're a Velasquez," he said. It wasn't a question. Isabella looked up, startled. The man was very old, with hair white as snow, and eyes so pale blue they were almost transparent. He wore antiquated clothing, and there was something about him that made Isabella's skin prickle. "How do you know?" she asked cautiously. "Because I was there," he said simply. "When Rodrigo Velasquez made the bargain." Isabella felt her blood freeze. "That was 200 years ago." "Yes," the man agreed. "I was the apprentice to to what you would call a demon, though it's not exactly what he is. I kept his books, prepared his contracts. I was in the back of the shop when Rodrigo signed away his soul and those of his descendants. Why are you telling me this?" Isabella demanded, her voice louder than intended. Other people in the archives looked at her irritably. "Because I've been paying for my complicity for 200 years, the man said, and for the first time, Isabella saw genuine sorrow in his eyes. "I was young, foolish, dazzled by the power my master possessed. I didn't understand what we were doing until it was too late. And when I tried to undo the bargain, when I stole the contract and tried to burn it..." He pulled up his sleeve, revealing an arm marked with burns that had never properly healed. "My master punished me, and cursed me to live until every Velasquez firstborn was claimed, forced to witness the suffering I helped create." "You can help," Isabella said urgently, grabbing his hand across the table. "You must know how to break the contract. I've told your ancestors. There's no way to break it without killing the entire bloodline," he said. "But," he hesitated, But what? Isabella begged. There's a way to transfer the burden. A voluntary substitution. If someone outside the Velasquez bloodline, someone of pure blood and pure heart, offered their life in place of the firstborn, the contract could be satisfied. But it must be completely voluntary, without coercion, without deception. And the person must fully understand what they're sacrificing. I would do it, Isabella said immediately. I'd offer myself in Mateo's place. The old man shook his head. It wouldn't work. You're a Velasquez. Your blood already belongs to the contract. It has to be someone from outside. Rafael, Isabella whispered. My husband, would he do it? The old man asked. Would he die for your son? And could you live with it, knowing you saved your child but condemned your husband? Isabella didn't answer. Couldn't. There's one more thing, the old man continued. Something I discovered in my years of punishment. The contract is fueled by the family's use of the cursed wealth. Every time you spend the tainted money, every time you profit from investments fed by dark magic, the contract grows stronger. If the Velasquez family renounced all the fortune, lived in voluntary poverty, the contract would weaken. Perhaps enough to be broken. For how long? Isabella asked. How long would we have to live with nothing? Generations, the old man admitted. Perhaps 3-4 generations of genuine poverty, not using a single peso of Velasquez money, accepting no benefit from it. Only then might the contract be weak enough to challenge. But Mateo is only 7, Isabella said desperately. He only has 14 years until— I know, the old man said gently. And that's why there's no real hope, is there? Because you don't have enough time. There's never enough time. He stood to leave. I'm sorry for the role I played in your tragedy, and for the tragedy of all the Velasquez who came before you, and all who will come after. Wait, Isabella called. What's your name? Miguel, he said. And I'll be there on Mateo's 21st birthday. I'll be there for every 21st birthday, witnessing as I'm forced to do, until the last Velasquez firstborn is claimed, and then he was gone, disappearing between the shelves like smoke. Isabella told Rafael everything Miguel had said. They stayed up all night, talking in whispers, while Mateo slept in the next room. I would do it, Rafael said finally. If my death would save Mateo, I'd offer myself. I know, Isabella replied, tears streaming down her face. And that's why I can't let you do it. Mateo needs a father, and I need you, but he needs a life, Rafael argued. A life that goes beyond 21 years. Bella, he's our son. It's our responsibility to save him at the cost of your life. Isabella shook her head. That's not salvation. It's just trading one tragedy for another. And the other option? Rafael asked. Renouncing the fortune. Isabella had been thinking about this. It would take too long. Miguel said generations. Mateo doesn't have generations. He has 14 years. Then we start now, Rafael said. We donate everything. We live modestly, and we tell Mateo the truth when he's old enough. He grows up knowing he must continue the poverty and teach his children the same. Maybe his granddaughter or his great-granddaughter, the contract will be weak enough to break. You're asking me to accept Mateo's death, Isabella said bluntly, to let him be taken, just with the hope that generations later, someone in our family might be free. I'm asking you to consider a future beyond ourselves, Rafael replied. Every Velasquez for 200 years tried to save only their own firstborn. None of them thought about those who would come after. Maybe it's time someone made that sacrifice. Isabella wanted to argue, wanted to scream that it wasn't fair, that it wasn't right to ask her to give up her son. But part of her knew Rafael was right. The curse would continue forever unless someone made the difficult choice. They spent weeks discussing it. Consulted lawyers about how to donate the entire fortune, met with representatives from charities, hospitals, universities. The Velasquez fortune was vast, spread across investments, properties, trusts. It would take time to dismantle everything, and then, one evening, Mateo came downstairs. He was 8 now, tall for his age, with those characteristic grey-green eyes. "Mama, Papa, why are you always sad?" he asked. "Is it because of me?" Isabella and Rafael looked at each other. They'd promised not to tell Matteo about the curse until he was older. But looking at that young, trusting face, Isabella realized he deserved the truth. "Sit down, Carino," she said. "We need to talk to you about something important. About our family," and so they told him. They simplified some details, but were honest about the essentials. There was a curse. He was the firstborn, and on his 21st birthday, something terrible would happen unless they found a way to stop it. Matteo listened in silence. When they finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he asked, "How was Matteo? The first Matteo, I mean. Was it scary for him?" Isabella felt her throat tighten. "We don't know, mi amor. Was he alone?" Matteo pressed. "Yes," Raphael admitted. "He was?" Matteo nodded as if processing this information. "I don't want to be alone," he said finally. "If it's going to happen to me, I don't want to be alone when it does." "It won't happen," Isabella said fiercely, pulling him into an embrace. "We'll find a way, I promise." But late that night, she and Raphael made a decision. They would begin donating the fortune. They wouldn't wait. They'd give Matteo the best possible start at weakening the contract, even if it wasn't enough to save him. And maybe, just maybe, his great-granddaughter or his great-great-granddaughter would be born free. It was poor comfort. But it was all they had. The following years were strange for the Velasquez family. Slowly, meticulously, they undid 200 years of wealth accumulation. The hacienda was donated to become a museum. Investments were liquidated and distributed to charities. Trusts were dissolved, properties sold. Other Velasquez family members were horrified. Isabella's cousins, distant aunts and uncles, all dependent on the shared fortune, protested, threatened lawsuits, accused Isabella of insanity. But Sophia stood by her daughter. "She's right," Sophia said at the tempestuous family meeting where Isabella announced her intentions. "We've all lived in the shadow of this curse. We've all benefited from blood-stained money. Perhaps it's time we paid for it in a different way." In the end, the decision was Isabella's to make. As the firstborn of her generation, a rarity, usually the firstborns were male, she'd inherited control over most of the fortune. And she used that control to dismantle it. Matteo grew up in increasingly modest circumstances. They moved from a large house to a medium-sized one, then to a small apartment. Raphael returned to work as a teacher, his original profession before marrying an heiress. Isabella found work as a librarian, ironically at the same archives where she'd met Miguel. Matteo never complained. He knew why they were doing this. As he grew, he did his own research on the curse, reading the family diaries, studying every attempt to break the contract. He was brilliant, like all Velasquez firstborns, and there was a determination in him that sometimes frightened Isabella. "I'm not just going to accept this," he told her on his 15th birthday. "I'm not going to disappear without fighting." "I know," Isabella said. "But Matteo, you need to understand. We've all tried to fight. Everyone has tried. Then we'll try in a new way," he responded. "I still have 6 years. A lot can happen in 6 years." The 6 years passed too quickly. Matteo became a remarkable young man. He studied physics, philosophy, ancient history, anything that might give him insight into the nature of his curse. He visited Miguel, who apparently had been waiting for this visit. "You're different from the others," Miguel said, studying the 19-year-old before him. "There's a light in you I haven't seen in the other firstborns." "It's because I know I'm going to die," Matteo said simply. "And I've accepted it. But I want to understand what's killing me. I want to look into its eyes and comprehend." Miguel was silent for a long moment. "You want to go with dignity. I want to go with knowledge," Matteo corrected. "My ancestors died in terror and confusion. I won't do the same." In the months leading up to his 21st birthday, Matteo prepared everything meticulously. He wrote letters to his parents, to the younger sister who'd been born 5 years after him, Rosa, with brown hair and blue eyes, blessedly free from the curse. He organized his affairs, donated his few belongings, made plans for his funeral. "You're not having a funeral," Isabella protested, sobbing. "You're not going to die, Mama," Matteo said, gently holding her hands. "We both know I will. But that doesn't mean my entire life was worthless. I lived 21 years. I knew love, joy, knowledge. That means something. It's not enough, Isabella whispered. I know, Matteo replied. But it's what we have. The night of his 21st birthday arrived cold and clear. Matteo had asked to spend it in the family's small apartment, surrounded by those he loved. Isabella, Raphael, Rosa, Sophia, now very elderly but insisting on being present, and a few close friends Matteo had told about his fate. They tried to make the evening normal. There was cake, modest presents, forced laughter. But as the clock approached midnight, the atmosphere changed. The air grew heavy, charged with something that wasn't physical, but was undeniably real. You should leave, Matteo said at 11:30. You don't need to see this. No, Isabella said firmly, gripping one hand while Raphael held the other. You won't be alone. We promised. At 11:58, Miguel appeared. He was simply there suddenly, as if he'd materialized from the air. He looked older than ever, bent under the weight of his own punishment. It's time, he said softly. Matteo nodded. He was pale but calm. What will it be like? I don't know, Miguel admitted. I've never had the courage to watch closely before. I always turned away. But tonight I'll witness. You deserve at least one witness who understands. The clock struck 11:59. Matteo looked around the room, memorizing each face. Te amo, Mama, Papa, Rosa, Abuela, all of you. Matteo, Isabella began, but she had no more words. The clock began to strike midnight, and then Isabella saw it. It was as if the air itself was tearing, a darkness that wasn't just absence of light, but presence of void. It formed around Matteo like invisible hands, enveloping him. Matteo stood firm. His eyes widened, not with fear, but with understanding. I see, he whispered. I understand now. It's not an entity. It's a contract written into the very fabric of reality. It's mathematics. It's beautiful in a terrible way. Matteo! Isabella screamed, trying to hold him, but her hands passed through him as if he were smoke. It's okay, Mama, Matteo's voice came, already sounding distant. It doesn't hurt. It's just change, transformation. I'm not dying, I'm becoming part of something greater. And then he was gone. The room fell silent, except for the sounds of Isabella sobbing. Raphael held her, his own tears falling quietly. Rosa buried her face in her grandmother's shoulder. Miguel stood, his face a portrait of ancient grief. 205 years, Miguel said quietly. 28 firstborns, and each one breaks me a little more. But then something extraordinary happened. A letter appeared, floating gently to the floor where Matteo had stood. Isabella picked it up with trembling hands. It was addressed to her in Matteo's handwriting. But it hadn't been there a moment before. With shaking fingers, she opened it and read, Dear Mama, if you're reading this, then it happened the way I thought it would. I can't fully explain what I saw in my final moments, but I'll try. The contract isn't just an agreement between great-great-great-grandfather Rodrigo and a dark entity. It's an equation written into the fundamental laws of the universe. Sacrifice for prosperity, death for life. It's a balance, and someone must always pay. But here's what I realized. The equation can be satisfied in different ways. For 200 years, our family paid with individual lives. But what if there was another way? You and Papa donated the fortune. You sacrificed not lives but wealth, comfort for future. You began to rebalance the equation. I chose to finish it. When the void came for me, I didn't fight. I offered myself fully, completely, with total knowledge of what I was doing. And I offered not just my life, but my free will, my choice. I transformed what should have been a forced tribute into a voluntary sacrifice. In doing so, I broke the fundamental rule of the contract. It was written to take, not to receive. It was designed to harvest the resistant, not the willing. I don't know if it worked completely, but I hope it did. I hope Rosa is free. I hope her children, if she has any, will be free. If I'm wrong, if another firstborn disappears 20 years from now, then I'm sorry. I tried, but if I'm right, Mama alive, live fully. Don't mourn me too long. I chose this. And in choosing, I gave my life meaning that no Velasquez had before. I love you, and I will miss you, but I won't regret this. Mateo, Isabella read the letter aloud, her voice breaking. When she finished, the room was silent. Then Miguel spoke, his voice filled with wonder. He did it, the old man said, looking at his own hands as if seeing them for the first time. I can feel it. The curse on me, it's dissolving. After 205 years, he began to cry, great shuddering sobs. He freed me. That brave boy freed me. But what about Mateo? Raphael asked, his voice raw with emotion. If the contract is broken, where is he? I don't know, Miguel admitted. Transformed, he said. Perhaps he became part of the solution instead of part of the problem. Perhaps he exists now in a form we can't understand. Is that enough? Isabella demanded. Does that bring my son back? No, Miguel said gently. It doesn't, but it honors his sacrifice, and it frees all who come after. Rosa stood in the garden of the small house she shared with her husband and 2 children. The eldest, a girl of 5 named Isabella after her grandmother, played with an orange cat, while the baby, an 18-month-old boy, napped in the shade. It was Rosa's 21st birthday. She'd spent the day in nervous anticipation, despite her mother insisting she was free from the curse, that Mateo had broken the cycle. But now it was midnight, and Rosa was still here, alive, whole. She looked up at the stars and whispered, "Thank you. Mateo, wherever you are, thank you." Inside the house, Isabella, now 54, watched through the window. Raphael stood beside her, his hand finding hers naturally after so many years together. He did it, Isabella said, tears of relief streaming down her face. Our boy really did it. He was always extraordinary, Raphael replied. They'd never become wealthy again. The money was gone and never returned. But somehow that felt right. The wealth had been bought with blood. The poverty, not true poverty, but the modest life of the middle class, was bought with sacrifice and choice. Sophia had passed away 3 years before, at 91, at peace for the first time since losing Eduardo 70 years earlier. Her last words had been, "Tell Mateo he was always my hero." Miguel had also departed, finally freed from his curse. But before dying, he'd left a book for Isabella, a record of every Velasquez firstborn, their lives, their hopes, their last words when known. It was a memorial, and Isabella read it when she missed Mateo, which was often. Young Isabella was 5 and spoke frequently about the uncle she'd never met, but whose stories her grandmother told. "Was Uncle Mateo a hero?" she would ask. "Yes," Isabella always answered. "The greatest hero of our family." Outside, a shooting star crossed the sky. Rosa made a wish, as she always did. She wished that her brother, wherever he was, knew that his sacrifice hadn't been in vain, that his family was free, that he was loved and remembered, and somewhere, in some place between starlight and the darkness between them, something that had once been Mateo Velasquez smiled. 5 years after Rosa's 21st birthday passed without incident, Isabella received an invitation. The Velasquez Hacienda, now a museum, was hosting an exhibition about the family's history. They wanted Isabella to speak at the opening, to share the story that had been kept secret for so long. She accepted. Standing in the grand hall, where she'd once played as a child, Isabella looked out at the gathered crowd, historians, students, distant relatives who'd never known the full truth. Behind her, on the wall, hung portraits of every Velasquez firstborn who had been lost to the curse. 28 faces spanning 2 centuries, and at the end, separate from the others, was Mateo's portrait, with a small plaque that read, "The one who broke the chain. My family kept a terrible secret for 200 years." Isabella began, her voice steady despite the emotion churning inside her. "We were blessed with wealth beyond measure, and we were cursed to pay for it with the lives of those we loved most." She told the story, simplified but honest. The desperate bargain made by a frightened father. The generations of firstborns who vanished on their 21st birthdays. The attempts to break free that always failed. And finally, Mateo's voluntary sacrifice that had ended it all. We don't know where he is now, Isabella said, looking up at her son's portrait. We don't know if he exists in some form we can't perceive, or if he truly died that night. But we know this: his choice freed every Velázquez born after him. His sister Rosa is 26 now, with 2 children of her own. His niece Isabella will turn 6 next month. They will live full lives, free from the shadow that haunted our family for centuries. She paused, wiping tears from her eyes. Wealth without sacrifice is meaningless, but sacrifice with purpose, that's the truest form of love. Matteo understood that, and in understanding it, he gave us the greatest gift possible: freedom. After the speech, people approached Isabella with questions, condolences, fascination. But one person stood apart, waiting until the crowd dispersed. It was a young woman, perhaps 19 or 20, with striking grey-green eyes. "Mrs. Velázquez," the woman said softly. "My name is Carmen. I'm not sure how to explain this, but I need to tell you something about your son." Isabella's heart began to race. "What about him?" Carmen glanced around, then spoke quietly. "I've been having dreams for the past 3 years, since I turned 18. Dreams of a young man with eyes like mine, telling me things, teaching me things about quantum physics, about the nature of reality, about how consciousness doesn't end, it just transforms." "Matteo studied physics," Isabella whispered. "I know, because he's been teaching me. In my dreams he said I needed to meet you, to tell you that he's okay, that he exists in a different state now, spread across the quantum foam of reality, but still aware, still him in a way. He wanted you to know he's not suffering. He's not alone. He's part of everything now." "Why you?" Isabella asked. "Why would he come to you?" Carmen smiled sadly. "Because I'm a Velázquez too, a distant cousin, through a branch of the family that left Mexico generations ago. And I'm a firstborn. But when my 21st birthday came 2 months ago, nothing happened to me. I'm free. We're all free. And Matteo wanted you to know that was worth it to him." Isabella stared at this young woman, this stranger who carried her family's eyes and her son's message. Part of her wanted to dismiss it as delusion, as the wishful thinking of a grieving mother, seeing patterns where none existed. But another part, the part that had lived with magic and curses for so long, believed. "Thank you," Isabella said finally, taking Carmen's hands. "Thank you for telling me." That night, Isabella sat in her small apartment, surrounded by Raphael and Rosa and young Isabella. She told them about Carmen, about the dreams, about the message. "Do you think it's real?" Rosa asked. "Or just someone who heard about the curse and wanted to give you comfort?" "I don't know," Isabella admitted. "But does it matter? If believing that Matteo exists somewhere in some form gives me peace, is that not real enough?" Raphael pulled out something from a drawer. "I've been holding on to this," he said. "I found it last year, cleaning out old papers. It's another letter from Matteo. It was in one of his textbooks, sealed in an envelope marked, 'Open if I was right.'" With shaking hands, Isabella opened it. This letter was shorter, just a few lines. "If you're reading this, then I succeeded. The curse is broken. Don't mourn what I lost. Celebrate what I gained. I chose to become part of the answer instead of remaining part of the problem. In doing so, I found a kind of immortality that no Velázquez fortune could ever buy. Live fully, love completely, and know that in some way, in some form, I'm watching over you all. Your son, your brother, your hero, as little Isabella calls me, Matteo P.S. Tell young Isabella that her uncle says she should study science. The universe is so much stranger and more beautiful than we imagine. I'm living proof." Isabella laughed through her tears. Only Matteo would include a postscript from beyond death, encouraging his niece to pursue STEM. He was one of a kind, Raphael agreed. Young Isabella, who'd been listening quietly, spoke up. "Can I see Uncle Matteo's picture again?" Rosa pulled out her phone, showing her daughter the portrait from the museum. The little girl studied it carefully. "He looks nice," she said finally. "I think I will study science, because Uncle Matteo says so." 10 more years passed. Isabella was 64 when she returned to the museum for its anniversary celebration. The Velázquez exhibition had become one of the most visited in Guadalajara, drawing people fascinated by the story of the cursed family and the sacrifice that broke the curse. But today was special. Today, they were unveiling a new section, the free generation. Rosa stood beside Isabella, now 36 with 3 children. Her eldest, Isabella, was 15, a bright girl obsessed with astrophysics, following her uncle's advice from beyond. There was also 10-year-old Mateo, named after his uncle, and 7-year-old Luz, named after the first Velázquez child saved by the cursed wealth. Carmen was there too, having become close to the family over the years. She'd graduated with a doctorate in quantum mechanics and often said it was because of the dreams that had stopped. Shortly after she delivered Mateo's message, the new exhibition featured photos of Rosa's children, of other Velázquez descendants born after the curse broke, all living full lives free from the shadow of the vanishing. There were 47 firstborns in the extended family now, ranging from infants to Rosa's age. All alive, all free. We wanted to show that the story didn't end with tragedy, the museum director explained. It ended with hope, with sacrifice that led to freedom, with one young man's choice to transform a curse into a blessing. Isabella stood in front of Mateo's portrait, the one that showed him at 19, brilliant and determined. Raphael stood beside her, both of them older now, marked by time and grief, but also by love and resilience. "Do you think he knows?" Raphael asked quietly. "How many lives his choice saved?" "I think he does," Isabella replied. "Whether he's scattered across quantum fields, or exists in some heaven we can't perceive, or simply lives on in our memories and in the freedom of his descendants. Yes, I think he knows." Young Isabella approached them. "Grandmother," she said, "I've been studying the physics of what might have happened to Uncle Mateo, and I have a theory." "Tell me," Isabella said. "Consciousness is just information," the teenager explained, her gray-green eyes bright with enthusiasm. "And information can't be destroyed, only transformed. When Uncle Mateo was taken by the curse, but offered himself willingly, he might have transformed his consciousness into a different form of information, spread across space-time, entangled with the quantum states of all his descendants. He's not gone. He's just distributed, present in small ways in all of us." It was a scientific explanation for what Carmen had described as dreams, what Isabella felt as presence. "And somehow it made sense, so we carry him with us," Isabella said softly. "Always," young Isabella confirmed, "in our cells, in our choices, in our freedom to live full lives. That's his legacy." As the exhibition opening continued, Isabella found herself smiling. Mateo had given up 21 years, so that hundreds of others could have 80, 90, 100 years. It was still a tragedy. She would never stop missing her son, never stop wondering who he might have become if he'd been allowed to live a full life. But it was also triumph, because his choice had meaning, because his sacrifice hadn't been for nothing. That night, back in her apartment, Isabella opened the box where she kept Mateo's letters, his journals, the small objects he'd left behind. At the bottom was something she'd never noticed before, a small piece of paper, folded many times to make it tiny. She unfolded it carefully. It was in Mateo's handwriting, but it wasn't addressed to anyone. It was simply a note, perhaps to himself. "If I must die young, let it be for something that matters. Let my life, however brief, be a lever that moves the world. Let my death be a door that opens for others. And let those who come after me know that love, real sacrificial love, is the only force in the universe strong enough to break even the oldest curses. That's how I want to be remembered. Not as a victim, but as a choice maker. Not as the one who was taken, but as the one who gave himself freely. That's the difference. And that difference is everything." Isabella held the paper to her chest and cried, not tears of sorrow, but tears of gratitude. For 21 years, with an extraordinary son, for his courage, for his wisdom, for his love that had echoed through time to free generations yet unborn. Outside, the stars burned bright over Guadalajara, and Isabella could almost hear Mateo's voice on the wind, saying what he'd said in his final moments. "It's okay, Mama. I'm not dying. I'm becoming part of something greater." And she believed him. The Velázquez fortune was gone, dispersed to help thousands through charities and institutions. But the true inheritance remained, the freedom Mateo had bought with his voluntary sacrifice, the knowledge that love could transform even tragedy into triumph, the understanding that wealth meant nothing compared to the legacy of courage and choice. The curse had made them rich in gold, but the sacrifice had made them rich in ways that truly mattered, and that was the story Isabella would tell her great-grandchildren one day, not as a tale of horror, but as a story of hope, of one young man who looked into the abyss and chose to step forward rather than be dragged, who transformed an ending into a beginning, who proved that even the darkest magic could be overcome by the brightest love.